Hi, super distant future Nicolas here, and the single take version, which might contain an amount of waffling and be searching for my words, right? So, the episode you're about to listen to was recorded in November 2023, and right now we're in August 2026. Oops. I'm going to take 5 to 10 minutes to lay down the situation here, which I realize is a lot of time. But if I just wrote a post about it on the forums, then it would be lost to half the listeners, and I don't want that. So there are 3 questions I'm going to try to answer here, which are, why did it take so long for me to edit this episode? Second one, why is this episode even ready now? And third one, what does this mean for the future of the podcast? So, very inane questions, which are past, present, future, but we're laying things down, so you know what's up. So why did it take so long? Well, I slacked off, but I slacked off is not an explanation, it's just a restatement of the fact that I have not done the thing. That's not an explanation per se. I could find lots of personal circumstances to exonerate myself with, or I could just blame myself in a self-bashing, self-flagellating way, but the main reason is some tension and lingering tension in my relationship to the medium of a podcast that has been detrimental to my enthusiasm in editing. And I say this as one of the most auditive people you'll find. I don't like much how the modern internet revolves around audio and video. I'm going somewhere. I'm not off topic. Don't worry. The short of it is that, to me, most videos don't have interesting visual ideas or more interesting visual ideas than someone's face. Let's see the box standard review that doesn't even do board game review, that doesn't do broad explanation. You just see someone's face in front of an IKEA shelf and they think they've done something useful. And it could really be an audio feed instead. And the only reason they aren't doing an audio and they're doing a YouTube video or something is there's no money in doing an audio feed. There's no money in writing things down. Video is the format that you can get viewership and maybe even some income from. And to be fair, even most audio feeds, they could really be blog posts. They don't deserve to be audio and waste everyone's time. Then most blog posts could actually be shortened to tweets without losing much of the substance. And most tweets, let's be frank, are not even worth writing to begin with. So, Sturgeon's Law stuff. But here's the longer version. I'm going to tell a little story. It's not really a story, it's more like a recurring event. I have friends who we're chatting on text chat software, and they regularly send me audio messages because they feel like typing is slow and they can't be bothered to type. And I endure this habit of theirs because I like them. But what's really happening here is that when they send me this message, it takes 40 seconds for me to listen to. But if they had written something, it would take me 10 seconds to read. Of course, the trade-off is it takes them longer to type than to just live blurb an audio file. Other problems is that an audio message is not easily searchable in the future. And if I'm listening to an audio message and I want to go back to the previous sentence to check something, in a blurs of speech, it's a hassle to rewind to the exact point you want, whereas in text, you can just previous sentence done. And overall, audio is just a less convenient format for the recipient, I feel. The only pro, because there is a pro, is that it's easier to convey and for the recipient to understand tone, right? Which is useful for some people or some relationships or some circumstances that call for it, or some events. But overall, the idea is, when you send me an audio message, more often than not, you're also implicitly saying to me that you value your time higher than you value my time. Which, I guess, is a viable position to take when it's a reciprocal exchange, even if I don't like it much. Now that I've done this, which sounds like an insane whatnot, let's go back to cube roots. So, if we go back to cube roots, it's not a well-researched, thoroughly scripted mini audiobook that takes us dozens of sessions of recording. Don't get me wrong, we do our homework before coming live to record, that's not the problem. But it's still somewhat closer to the kind of flow of consciousness slop that I described earlier. Like the kind of YouTube videos that are churned by the dozen every week. So it's like single take, easy for the people recording it. And I have been very self-conscious about it since the beginning. And also there's an additional crucial difference between the private audio messages that I described before. If, as a podcast editor, by being lazy, I save a minute of my time, but then the podcast is 1 minute longer for the listener, I do not trade 1 minute of my time for 1 minute of a listener, because there are, well, like tens or hundreds or thousands of listeners. Well, okay, not really remotely thousands in the case of Cube Roots, but you get the idea, right? My brain has a hard time wrapping around the amount of human times that I waste when I do not make the podcast efficient, time-wise efficient. So I have decided back then to adopt this neurotic editing style, where I will just hunt for the slightest pause, hesitation, repeat that I can cut out without making it sound too uncanny, right? So each episode, it has taken me like thousands of micro edit, no, not thousand, but over 1,000 micro edit and easily over 10 hours to edit an episode. I'm not sure of the upper boundary. I don't want to give a number because I have not recorded it, the amount of time, but it takes me a bare minimum of 10 hours, and I would not be surprised if it's double or more. Probably not over 20. Let's not think too much about it. It took me a ridiculous amount of time given the format, like an unhealthy amount of time. And I was excited to do so the first time, but each subsequent one, it became more and more like unpaid work. And I know, this is where some other people will switch the conversation into some sort of crowdfunding plea or something. Don't worry, this is absolutely not the direction I'm going to. But the big idea is I self-imposed a bullshit editing style that I don't know if you noticed, but it doesn't, for the effort I put in, it doesn't even sound that good. You can hear the jump cuts between sentences and even within sentences, and then they do not sound very natural or good or whatnot. Also, at the same time, I have to face the reality that for all the snobbery I just made an expose about audio formats, I listen to flow of consciousness podcasts that the grumpy part of my brain would call slop, and I do so while doing chores every single week. Why? Because I like the people in these podcasts enough that what the grumpy part of my brain would call subpar informative quality of the content is supported by some human qualities that I appreciate. So now the question is, cool, then why don't I want that for Cube Roots? Why is it not the attitude I adopt for Cube Roots? And essentially it boils down to the fact that I'm I know that I'm boasty and chatty and whatnot here, but I'm a fairly private person who does not want, at all, to become the kind of internet persona that other people form parasocial bonds with. And if you don't know what parasocial things are, bless you. Please keep not digging that. It's awesome. And so, being the target of parasocial attention is the opposite of what I want in life. But we'll come back to that in a second. So that's how I fucked up, right? How I had a terrible attitude and fucked up. Second question, which will be the shortest to answer, why am I releasing the episode now? The answer is very boring. I had an actual deadline for the episode. It was a soft deadline. It's the day I'm changing my computer. Because when I'm changing my computer, I'm also changing my operating system. I will not get into that while it's completely off topic. But also by doing so, my current editing software does not exist for my new operating system, which means that I need to power through the edit of the current episode and with the current bullshit editing style, because I'm not going to change style mid-edit, so I'm trying to be a bit consistent. So the podcast can be out, and then when it's out, I can finally wipe my disks clean and install new stuff on them. That's the reason, that's it. That's why it's out. I want to change computer, and I don't want to throw my editing away, so I'm finishing it first. Third question, what about the future of the podcast? Does this mean I'm fed up with it and I'm not doing it anymore? No, okay. Something interesting happened. So the OGGY Guild's HQ, online HQ, is its own space on BoardGameGeek. We have a guild. It's awesome. I don't want that to change. We don't want that collectivity to change because, as said, I like the written, well thought out, searchable internet. So I want the written, well thought out, or better thought out than other places content to continue. Awesome. I hate the word content, and I'm self-conscious about the fact that I've been using it at least twice during this blurb. Let's go on. Single take, go. But also, we have an offshoot Discord server that is used for live online play. And earlier this year, something interesting happened. I got contacted by someone whom I knew a bit, and who wanted to join the live games on the Discord server, but was a bit shy about it, and asked me if I could ease them in with a play session that would include like the nice, friendly people. So everyone I've played with online is like nice and friendly, so I was a bit confused and asked, who are the nice people? And will you believe it? What I got in response was just a list of every single Cube Roots host to date. And then I thought about it, and I realized that this sort of rang a bell, because all podcast hosts I've picked so far have been people that I feel comfortable with, and that I like playing with online. So I thought, this could be how I conciliate everything. This can be the angle for the future. This can be, I remove the broom that I have stuck in my bum, and we're going to have more frequent, less edited, more sounding episodes, and I can rationalize open quotation marks, wasting your time, closing quotation marks, starting with this blurb right now, even though the rest of this episode will still be the old style editing. So, but by next episode, we'll have more frequent, less edited, more human-sounding episodes, more natural one with breathing and poses and whatnot. And I can rationalize this. More relaxed attitude as the extended emphasis on inefficient chatter, what I would call inefficient chatter, being stealth advertisement for the humans in the Discord server. Like, if I can mentalize it as, if you like the idea of playing a game with the people you're listening to here right now, well, there are dozens more of us, and we're all pretty cool, so please come on. And that's it. That's how I'm going to do this. Thanks for listening. Enjoy your episode about an award that we've given almost 3 years ago. And thanks again. Super distant future Nicolas out.
Get is fully focused by the cable connecting to your headphones.
Cube Roots. Cube Roots. Cube Roots. Cube Roots.
Welcome to episode 3 of Cube Roots, a podcast about old-school German-style board games. Tonight with me, he's young, he's Dutch, he's the only food scientist I know who hates bananas, it's Bas!
Hey, I'm Bas. I'm probably one of the younger members of the guild, but that's mostly because there are a lot of old folks here. I'm the other Dutch guy, where Dennis is the first Dutch guy.
Returning from the pilot, our mandatory British presence, it's QWERTY Martin.
Hi, it's great to be back again. Nice to be chatting with you guys tonight.
So, in the last podcast, I was slightly concerned that the listeners didn't have the proper time to be introduced to the new hosts. So I decided to have a new little warm-up segment, which might work or not work, which I've called
Watcha Playing Lately.
Pretty self-explanatory segment. We are just going to each talk about the games we've played lately, board games of course, and that's about it. I will now roll for start player. There are 6 possible configurations, so I'll just check my spreadsheet for that. It will be Martin, then Bas, then me. Martin, what you playing lately?
So a game that I've played a couple of times this month is a new one released at Essen, which doesn't seem to have had much publicity on BGG yet, which is Moldavia from Zoc Games, and Roberto Fraga is the designer. He designed a whole bunch of things. He's not a name I knew that well, but when I was looking at his back catalogue just now, there are quite a few titles I recognise. Captain Sonar, River Dragons, Dancing Eggs. He tends to design, I think, quite silly, or almost you would say, games. I mean, Dancing Eggs is a very silly game. Zoc, also a publisher that specialise in family-friendly, accessible games. And this one caught my eye because it looked like an OG with a shared board and a lot of interaction. It is a pick up and deliver game in which you are fishermen sailing your boats around the sea, picking up fish and delivering them to different sides of the board where those fish are in demand. And the gimmick it has is a cloth board, and there is a good reason for it being a cloth board, which is that it gradually folds up as you play the game. So the board becomes smaller and smaller, which represents fog rolling in from different sides of the board. And the game ends when it gets below a certain size. And this works really well. The cloth is it's a very thin, sort of shiny fabric, and it can be folded over several times and still allow the pieces to move around, and that all works really nicely. It has nice chunky wooden boats with a mast which you can drop your fish eeples onto. And it's a programmed movement game. So at the start of each round, you each set up the moves that you want to make with your boat and then resolve them one by one. It's pretty chaotic, as program movement games often are. It's hard to know exactly what the situation is going to be on the board by the time it gets around to your turn to resolve your movement. And there's also a lot of take that in this game, more than I was expecting, I think. So you're not just competing over spaces on the board where you pick up fish and being first to deliver certain contracts. You're also able to steal fish from other players, and you're allowed to swap victory point cards with other players. You're allowed to replace a card for a delivery that someone was just about to make with all the right fish for you. And the fog, when the board folds over, will affect players as well and cause them to lose fish. So it's chaotic and it's take that-ish, so it's not going to be for everyone. The first time I played, one player wasn't really in a great mood for that and didn't have a great time. But I think if everyone is in the mood for that, it's a really good fun game. It's maybe 30 to 45 minutes and not like high strategy or anything, but it's a lot of fun. I've been having a good time with it.
The only game I know from Zoc is Captain Sonar, which is probably the most popular one.
From Zoc or from Fraga?
I have forgotten.
Fraga is the designer, Zoc is the publisher. I don't know if...
Zoc, okay, so it's a German one?
Yeah.
So the only game I know from Fraga is Captain Sonar. So as a publisher, are they also the gimmick publisher?
Zoc, I think... They have nice components. They put a lot of thought into them. I think they do a lot of very family-friendly games, very accessible. Quite a few games that I've really, really enjoyed by them.
I played recently a lot of games with several guildies on the Discord. If you're interested, you're always welcome to join. We played Brian Baru, which I forgot how much I enjoyed that, and also how painful it is that it didn't make the OGGY 2021 leadership last year. But yeah, it's a really fun game. For the people who don't know, it's basically an area control game with an action selection mechanism based around cards, which very cleverly borrows the trick-taking structure. I wouldn't say it's a trick-taking, but that's a whole different discussion. And besides that, I played... Martin was talking about programming games, and recently I revisited, because I was really interested to retrying it again, Small Samurai Empires, which is on Tabletopia, which is like a bootleg version of Tabletop Simulator, and the user interface is terrible, so for that I wouldn't recommend it. But there are a lot of fun games.
Bootleg is a joke, right? The module of Tabletopia is officially enforced by the developers and generates money, right?
Yeah, it's like a joke. I meant more like it's not a rip-off, but like a very bad version of Tabletop Simulator. Personally, I just don't think sandbox environments aren't the best way to implement board games online, but it's a whole different story. Anyways, back to the Small Samurai Empires. So that's it's an area majority game based around programming actions, plus there is some stock market involved. It sounds crazy, it is a bit crazy. My conclusion was I do like it, but not enough to hunt down a copy or play it a lot. It's just a little bit too long and a little bit too fiddly, not streamlined enough for my taste. I think it takes 2 hours, and the Tabletopia definitely didn't help. But at the same time, I don't think it will be much quicker with a better implementation or in real life. And besides that, we played Maskman, which is a very fun little...
Jesus Christ, these are the two I wanted to pick.
Oh, okay, then you can talk about Maskman then. Then I will talk I will talk about Mu then, because I also had some comments about Mu.
I wanted to quickly jump in to give a slightly different perspective on Small Samurai Empires, which is, I think the game is good, and I think it took twice the time as it would in analog. I think it has production issues related to how stuff is laid out on the board and some tokens which are a bit of a visual clutter.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's as close to an OG as a Dorks on a Map game could get. Probably even closer than something like Cyclades or whatnot, because there's not that much killing involved. There are action verbs that are very military-ish, but with another coating, it could go like any other game where you remove a small amount of opponent's pieces when playing in majorities. Like, it's a thing you do in, let's say, El Grande, like remove a cube in a region you have presence in or something.
And the stock market effect especially makes it a bit
Yeah.
OG, because once you were on a bedroom break, Nicolas, and I made a little deal with Andy, who was also playing, like, okay, this is an area, we need to pump up that area, man, because Nicolas is low on that area and we are high, so we need to invest more into making that area worth more. I think that's a very, very smart part of twisting around the area majority thing.
Yeah, it doesn't play exactly like a war game, even though it has the shape of it, or an Ameritrashy Dorks on a Map thing. I would say it's about the same level of complexity as Brian Boru,
Definitely.
but a bit less well designed on the component side. And especially the mix of Tabletopia and the Pretty Roth rulebook makes things slower than they would be otherwise. So I'm still enthusiastic to actually try the analog game. Wait and see. I think the entire digital experience has had a larger influence on my opinion than I'm willing to admit yet. So I'm not sure what I think of it. We also played Maskman, which I think both of you have played. Martin maybe in the past.
For me, it was the first time. That was the reason why I wanted to try it.
Me too. It is good. It is better than good, probably. I want to play it a couple more times before settling on great and want a copy. Disclaimer, I suck at shedding games, so I'm probably not the best person to analyze their merits. But it's great. It's a game where cards have no value. You only play a suit. The suits have a pecking order that is determined during the play. And essentially, you play a meld of 1 to 3 cards of the same suit. And then if you are trumping with a suit that you know is better than the previous one, you play the same amount of cards. If you're introducing a new suit as getting higher in the pecking order, you have to play 1 more card. And it's just a game about jousting to make the suit you have the most cards in hand left be the better one in the pecking order. And it has an amount of very interesting things going on.
Yeah, it was surprisingly good, because first I come a bit more from a trick-taker background. So first I was a bit meh on Shadows, especially I played Tissue, which is very hard game to just get into if you haven't played any Shadows.
Yeah.
And then I tried Scout, and that one also didn't really blow me away. But then I played Haggis, and then I played Bacon, which I both think are really, really great, but especially Bacon. And then I got a bit more...
Can you save your Bacon for later?
I will save it.
I have a hunch.
No. I'm not gonna... I will talk about Bacon later, but I wasn't really planning on talking about Bacon later. Oh yeah, and I wanted to talk about Mu, because that's also really great. That is a trick taker. For the people who don't know it, it's a partnership trick taker, but it hasn't fixed partnerships. First there will be a small, or actually quite a large bidding phase on which everything will be figured out around surrounding the whole partnerships, and also which cards will be the trumps. And then the games will be played out. We played it a lot, I think, with a specific group on the Discord. And I'm really looking forward to play that even more. And I was able to hunt down a copy, so I'm also really looking forward to play that more in real life.
Yeah, Mu is a really interesting game that I think when I first played it was before I'd had so much experience with trick takers, and I found it really quite baffling, especially the bidding phase. But coming back to it now, recently, with a lot more experience, I appreciate it a lot more. I think it's really, really interesting one. And that bidding is such a big part of it, because you're trying to do so many things with it. You're trying to find your partner and say which side you want to play on, and how far you're prepared to, how strong your hand is, how your hand is strong. It's just really interesting. And you know, the game is much more about the bidding than the actual trick taking.
Exactly what I was going to say. Like, the bidding can take as long as, probably because we're newbies, but it can take half the hand in terms of duration, and like, it's the slow unfolding of the mistakes you've made. But an entertaining unfolding. I don't want to say that there are no decisions during the trick taking, certainly not, but it feels like you're getting consequences for your hubris.
Yeah, it's like during the bidding phase, you're basically making your battle plan, and then during the trick-taking phase, you're trying to actually do that plan, but yeah, obviously, life is what happens when you're making plans, so sometimes it can go very, very, very wrong.
Alright, I have absolutely no idea how to transition to the next segment, so I will just play the sting.
It's a topic of the day.
The topic of the day is OGGYs 2023. What does the OGGY acronym refer to? How do the OGGYs even work? I have no idea, but fortunately I have with me the mastermind behind the concept, Martin.
Yes, so I would say OGGY. I don't know, that's how it always was in my head. But I always thought that it would be nice once we'd set up this guild to not just focus on old games the whole time. I know the O is for old school, but it doesn't mean they have to be actually old. And I don't want us to have a reputation of being those guys who just like playing games from the 90s and digging up these hidden gems. And it was always about a style of game that does still exist now, and that we want to support and encourage and recognize the designers and publishers who are producing games in that style, because we love these games, you know. So
I feel like we will have to signpost a lot in this podcast that old school doesn't mean old.
One of the things that I wanted us to do as a guild was to have an annual award. I followed the Trick Taking Guilds award for a few years and really enjoyed it, and the way they've done the same thing there, always looking out at these new games, not just going back to the old ones. They also have a Hall of Fame like we do, which looks backwards, but I wanted to have something that looked at what was coming out now. So I kind of mostly copied the format for the OGGYs from the Trick Taking Guild as well. So we've only had one so far, but we're in the process of doing the one for this year. So we're now at the end of 2023, but we know it takes people quite a long time for the games to kind of circulate and for people to get the chance to play them. So we're at the moment considering games that were published in 2022. There's been nearly a year for people to have a chance to play them, and in some cases we're considering ones published a little bit before that, but which didn't get wider circulation until 2022.
Okay, full disclosure, my understanding of that, because we have the published date as recorded on BoardGameGeek, which is usually the first widespread English or international edition. Most of the time we follow it. Sometimes it means publication date gets updated as the game gets actually an international publication, and we have to reconsider it. Sometimes there are games that got published but not widespread enough and are still recorded as their old date. Then we don't use the official BGG year. So my understanding of how this works is Martin picks what makes sense, and if there's not a lot of grumble in response, that's the canon.
So what we did, I guess it was a couple of months ago now, was just ask for people's initial nominations and ask people to mention up to 3 games which they felt fit the criteria of that becoming widely available in 2022 and being OG, whatever they feel OG means to them. We're not too prescriptive about it because we can't be. We'll just let the voting sort out whether they're OG or not. So about 30 games were mentioned in that process.
Nice.
And we will now, in the near future, put those up as a poll on a thread in the guild. And again, I think we'll ask people to choose up to 3 of those to go forward to the final. And the top 3 are going to be the finalists. So we'll kind of recognise all of those as being OGGY finalists. And then we'll have a final vote just between those 3. And there'll hopefully be some more time for people to make their cases for which one of those 3 games they think people should be voting for. Hopefully we can arrange some play sessions so that people can try the ones they haven't tried. I know we managed that last year. We had all 3 games that were in the final last year or made modules so that people could try them. So hopefully we'll be able to do that same kind of thing this year.
I literally played none of them before the finalists were announced, and I was happy to have been able to make an informed decision.
So yeah, that's the idea of the award and the process. We will hopefully have a result by, I would say, Christmas time, something like that.
Nice, and hopefully I will be less awful at editing the podcast. Yeah, sure. So this will act as an advertisement. Please come vote for the things. So my question for you all is, what is your understanding of what OGGYs are? What are the criteria that they should meet, or what you think the concept relates to, because it might mean something else for some people? And we'll rotate the start order from the previous segment. Bas, then me, then Martin. Bas, what do you think OGGYs are?
For me, basically, the OGGY is like a representation and a celebration of more modern games, but which either follow very closely or resemble certain design principles we come to love in OG games. A shared common space, no multiplayer solitaire, a lot of player interaction, certain family friendliness, things like that. So for me, it's more or less a celebration of modern games which also have certain OG sensibilities. So I think something like Baru, for example, from previous year is a very good example of that, because it isn't like a really very strong OG in the sense that it has a lot of tracks and a little bit of fiddliness, which we often associate more with modern Euro games. But at the same time, it does have that interaction and that OG feel for me. So, and I think that's basically what it encapsulates for me, because that also shows, hey guys, we have all these very old games which we really like and enjoy, but we're not just some bunch of old grumbers, we just like old games. We're also celebrating new games with the same design principles, and like the OGGY is basically a celebration of that, and the winner of is the best example of that particular thing for a certain year.
Yeah, I will not repeat my rant from episode 1 about Brian Boru. Your answer is pretty close to what Daryl said at the time, so fair enough.
You don't have to agree with me, but
No, I agree with you. I think my standards are set too high about what I would like to win the award, but it's a good thing that we celebrate designs that are not completely away from our sensibilities, but are getting close enough that we should send the signal, please make more of that.
Yeah, for some other example that is too late because that's already a bit older, is Quest for Eldorado, for example. It isn't fully OG because it has some deck building, which you could more or less consider a more modern design mechanic. But it is also, some certain elements of it are very OG, like you have to actually fight for your spot. There's a bit of blocking and smart. There's a lot of tension involved around blocking and deciding the tempo and when do you run or do you want to shed. That makes it very OG for me, but at the same time, the deck building mechanism itself is not very OG.
Would you say that the celebration is a sort of way of saying, I would rather encourage designs that are slowly leaning back towards our thing than complaining that the game is not OG enough, whatever that means?
Yeah, basically, because I like to look at the positive side, and I think it's also, now, I don't think it's our responsibility, but if you like certain games for certain principles, then you should support the games that have those principles. So talk about them, buy them, play them, because that incentivizes the markets to make more of these games. And I think we see that a bit over last year, because things like Zoo Vadis, and now with the Cascadero game that's coming out from Bitewing, a new Knizia game. There are at least some new OG-like games coming out. Obviously, there are also some modern Euro elements in them, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Like with Zoo Vadis, I haven't played Quo Vadis, but I have played Zoo Vadis with the peacocks. That seems like a great addition. I really enjoy those, and I also really enjoy the special powers.
It is. My understanding of the OGGYs is essentially what Martin said at the beginning, which is that we don't want to be grumps that are just defined by some sort of veneration for old games, and then sometimes just picking the new Knizia that accomplishes something every 5 years. That's a bit mean. He does more than one thing every 5 years. It is tied to a discoverability issue, right? Because we have collectively decreed for a Hall of Fame that will only be eligible games that have been published before 5 calendar years ago, because people will not have the time to have discovered and played them enough to make an informed opinion, right? So if we are analyzing current game years or past game years, it is hard to have played them all, have discovered them all, and have found if any of them is Hall of Fame material, right? So it would be unfair to say that a game has to be Hall of Fame material to be able to get Game of the Year. That's an unrealistic expectation to have. So in my head, it's like an award that by nature is slightly less meaningful than the Hall of Fame, but by necessity, right? Because we don't want to have to wait 5 or 6 years to qualify as a game that is worth our inspection, because that feeds into the whole old people shouting at cloud that only play games from way before whoever just joined BGG 6 months ago is interested in. And that makes the guild less accessible if we obsess over games that are just old enough that enough people have played them. That's my understanding. I have personally I feel like my emotional level of investment into OGGYs is, oh, nice, at the end of the game I can make a rant in a podcast.
Well,
But I think that they are important to other people and to the public image of the
yeah,
guild.
and to chain into that, because I think you're already touching upon what I always a bit feel with the guild overall, and which also seems like against the whole Kickstarter FOMO stream, is I think this guild also really celebrates playing games. And I think that is also one of the, now not the purpose of the OGGYs, but at least one of the things we want to do is, okay, let's say you're a new gamer and you look at those games from the 90s, they don't look that good. They don't look that appetizing. And I also notice it myself, especially if I would like to play games with just some friends. I have a very old copy of Through the Desert, which looks terrible on the outside. And then I have like a really nice fresh copy of Renature or something like that. Both are great games, but those more modern games, the production values got up, etc. Those are just more accessible from a attractive point of view. They are looking more attractive, lost from besides from the whole gameplay, and I think that's also one of the things from the OGGYs. Like, if you want to play games with us, don't want to play those old games because you don't like the looks of them, then play one of these modern games with us, because those are also very OG.
Yeah, but my conclusion there would just be replace the old games with better production values, and then you can play them with people who are very invested in that.
True, but that's a whole different story.
True. Martin, what's your understanding of this whole thing?
So, yeah, I think you've covered a lot of ground there. I think it clearly has a different purpose from the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame is about sort of tried and tested excellence. People are still playing these games, still seeing, they're just the best of the best. The OGGY is much more about just, as Baz said, just kind of celebrating and rewarding new games that are being published in this style and just saying, yes, it's great, we want more of this. And on BGG, a lot of the conversation is always around new games. So it's a way of us being part of that conversation and kind of pointing to those new games, that we're interested in. That and as Baz said, they tend to bring some more modern ideas in as well, but they still have that kind of OG core with the shared boards, with the sort of heads up interaction, simple rules, all that kind of stuff. And there are other guilds and areas on BGG doing this kind of thing for the kind of games that they're interested in. There's tons of stuff about the solo game of the year. We mentioned Trick Taking. There's like a combinatorial abstracts game of the year. So it just established that OG is a thing, and that OG doesn't mean 90s beige games from Germany. It's broader than that. The other thing I was going to say was I would like it to be more than just the best game of the year that kind of could be considered OG if you squint a bit. I would like it to be chosen because it's good at being in that OG style. It's not just, well, we like this one best and yeah, it's kind of OG. It's like we're actually, it should be a game that's good because of its OG qualities, ideally.
What did you vote for last year?
I voted for Brian Boru last year, which I think, yes, you could consider it a bit more complex than certainly some of the games in the Hall of Fame, but not more complex than something like Taj Mahal or, that level of game, the more complex games from the 90s and 2000s. So I felt that because it was all about that shared board, really, and the tracks that it does have all play directly back into that shared board. It's a very interactive game. Right. You have to be watching what the other players are doing. Almost all of the scoring happens through comparison with other players. You're not optimizing. There's no player boards. So yeah, I think it was a good example.
What I'm always surprised by is the amount of new games that get played in the first place. Just the fact that we have 30 games nominated means that amongst the guild, there are people discovering and playing new OG games, which, regardless of who wins, is already a win in the first place. I was very surprised that I was the main person discussing one new game this year. Which was like Caesar's Empire. But the other 29 I would never have heard of without all of you. And I don't know how you all do. The problem is finding new OGs is hard. Not because not a lot are made, but because so many games are made and they're a lower proportion of the market nowadays. I have a slight segue about how do you find new games? What the discoverability outlets? Because I have like before I joined the guild, my main discoverability outlet was an algorithmic website called recommend.games, where you enter your BGG profile and it looks at all the games you've rated on BGG and tries to compare there to the ratings of everyone else on BGG, and then through magic mathematics try to figure out what games people who rate like you tend to like and make you a super custom personalized and very wrong but less inaccurate than every other recommendation algorithm I've found. Then I joined the guild and suddenly my main recommendation algorithm was called Martin because Martin plays all the new stuff. He can describe it fairly quickly and then I know it's likely to be for me or not. So, Martin, how do you find these games in the first place?
So, yeah, I was just thinking about this. I mean, who are the original discoverers? Because I definitely find a lot of them from other people talking about things. I have, hundreds of geek buddies now, and we have the guild, and there are other places I hang out on BGG. One I would definitely think is worth mentioning here is W. Eric Martin. His BoardGameGeek news. He obviously is one of us, he loves these kind of games as well. He loves a lot of other types of games as well, but he often features games that are on the simpler end and on the more interactive end than a lot of the stuff that's coming out. And I think we're really lucky that the person in that position on BGG is someone who feels that way about games, because you could easily imagine BGG news just being a parade of Kickstarter kind of complicated, fairly solitary stuff. And I find it really interesting how much variety he features and how often I'll read something he's written or watch one of his videos or a designer diary that he's asked someone to write, and they'll talk about, what they were trying to do with the game, and often they'll mention these kind of qualities as well, and then my ears will prick up and I'll note that down as one to check out. So I think Eric is definitely a great source of recommendations.
And Baz, you're a bit more into trick takers than most. This is not strictly about OGs, but how do you find new games, essentially? Do you just look at random new releases and...
I do check the designer diaries sometimes. One of the other main sources for me is both the BoardGameGeek list for all the different PCIO mods, the new beta games on BGA, the PCIO mods in, the Portland Game Collective Discord, because those are all games that I also know that I will be able to play them quite easily, because they are available online. It's just a matter of gathering some people from the guild and say, hey, who wants to try it? Like, for example, I saw Terra Nova, which is the Terra Mystica Light game, popping up on BGA beta, and then I'm like, okay, that's nice, I heard some things about it, let's try that one. And I think that's one of the ways for me to discover new games. It's also one of the ways I've discovered Sea Salt and Paper, for example. And then I have one or two specific online board game stores which are very specialized. They have a lot of small things. They often back a lot of Kickstarters, so you can buy them through the store instead of buying them again through the Kickstarter, which is very financial beneficial from an European standpoint, because otherwise you're always working with VAT and it's going through the roof. And like the game we played last time, Nicolas, Infiltrators, like I saw that one coming up in their new games, because they also do a lot of pre-orders. So then I look, okay, this looks interesting, let's take a look at it. Okay, that also sounds interesting, and then I want to play it. So that's basically how I go through with that.
Yeah, I was just going to say the PCIO or playingcards.io thing has been really interesting. The fact that it's a site and Virtual Tabletop as well, which is the open source version, but it's a site that really easily lets you throw together some components, a board, a deck of cards, whatever you need to try a game out with fairly minimal effort. I think that's been great. That's something I didn't know about before the pandemic and when we were all stuck playing games online. And it works particularly well for the type of games we're talking about.
And for all of you Dungeons and Dragon nerds, it's not virtualtabletop.com, it's virtualtabletop.io, which is probably a terrible name because mistaken for the far more popular website that is dedicated to online role-playing games.
I want to just realize, because I quickly went to the game store website I normally use to check out the new games, there's already some kind of filter in there for me, because OG games, they're often not that expensive. 40 euros max. So I see something that's called Tales from the Red Dragon Inn. It's 110 euros. I know I don't have to click that because it's too expensive.
Right.
It's definitely not going to be in the area of games that I enjoy. I see a Draftosaurus expansions. I know it's quite easy for me to actually go to those games, but I also see like some small things, like a small card game called Hands, and that looks very interesting. But then I will take a look at it.
So would you say that the cheap price and the access through some online modules makes it so that you're less invested in a lengthy process of research and that you just see a game and try to find the quickest way to immediately play it, try it, or buy it if it's cheap?
I think that's it. Yeah, because if it's easy, for me that makes it, if it's very accessible. In order to see if I like it, I have to try it out. And if it's cheap, I'm willing to buy it.
Yeah.
And otherwise, I want to try it out first. And then if it's nice, I will still buy it. There are several games I've bought. The new Raw game, I played Raw first with the nice module Andy made. And then I was like, yeah, I really enjoyed this game. And then I bought it. But for me, that helps to narrow it down. And the same with Sea Salt and Paper. I first played it a lot of BGA. And now it's also very widely available. So now I will actually buy it. So in conclusion, listen to that, publishers. Make your games very available online because it will boost sales. If your game is good, that's very important.
So we have a list of all the candidates for OGGY's 2023. OGGY, no S. Starting with me, then Martin, then Bas. Which game do you expect to win this year? Which was a suggested subtopic. I'm a bit nervous about that because I feel like this and the next question is us swaying the votes of the listeners. So listeners, please don't just listen to us. We're going just to express our opinion,
I
vote
think
for something else.
You overestimate your power over other people, Nicolas.
I just don't want to cheat the votes. I don't think I have a lot of power. I just don't want the games that we are going to talk about to stick in their mind and make them more likely to investigate games that we already say are probably
But at the same time, there's a reason why we're talking about them, right?
Yeah. So what I think will win this year is... I don't want to name a card game again because, like, I feel like Sea Salt and Paper is very well positioned because it's on BGA and at a small price point and a lot of people in play has played it. So it will qualify probably to the finals. Then it will probably lose to whatever on the grounds that it's a card game because an amount of people are slightly miffed that Scout won last year on the grounds that it's not a real board game because it's a card game and the Shedder. And a lot of people are, yeah, Shedders are just a subset of Trick Takers or something, where actually the Trick Taking Guild doesn't even consider it for their awards. So we're the foster home for that poor game that has no guild for itself. And it won! We like it enough that it won! So I would say my heart is telling me Sea Salt and Paper has a good shot at winning, just through sheer exposure. But I feel like there might be an upset in the finals, even though I don't know which game would cause the upset.
So then if I understand correctly, you think the main reason why Sea Salt and Paper is a good candidate is because it has a very wide accessibility, because it accesses quite well through BGA.
Yes.
We have the statistics here. We see 150 people have it marked as owned on BGG, which are part of the big OG group list. Yeah. So, yeah.
I don't think it would have won, and it has not won yet, right? But I don't think it would be a good candidate to winning if we run the polls in 5 years. But right now, because of its presence on BGA and its very cheap price on the market, and the fact that it's a super simple game that you can play at low player counts and is super accessible and simple, and you can try it in 15 minutes, a lot of people will have played it, and by sheer numbers, a lot of people will vote for it, at least in the first round, if not in the finals. And that's why that is my main contender right now. Now, it might have trouble because an amount of people will be grumpy. Are we like the card game guild or something? And I just want to say that card games are real board game people. I need to clarify my position here because it's a micro argument that I've had with an amount of people and has caused some quid pro quo with, for example, Martin in the past. I'm French, which I feel like I remind everyone every episode. I don't want this to be my main character trait. And in French, we have this concept of jeux de société, so society games, which encompasses all board games and card games and adjacent and traditional games in that area. So we don't have in our vocabulary a distinction between games that are played on the board and other games, for example, with cards that are not played on the board. these are the same concept to us. And the appellation board games, or Brettspiel, or however it's pronounced in German, is a fairly recent one that has only starting to be translated in French into jeux de plateau, so games with a board. I've never heard that during the 20th century. And I feel like even BoardGameGeek being named BoardGameGeek is an admission that the term board game is a bit more universal than you have a board. It's not that I don't understand what a card game is. If you tell me that something is a card game, obviously I know what you mean. Therefore, card game has a meaning. What I'm saying is that BoardGameGeek encompassing board games and card games mean that the term board game is starting to have this very French-like encompassing of both games that have and do not have a board are functionally the same hobby. And also, I feel like that an amount of people who say card games can't be XXX often comes with card games are lesser games than board games. They are like mini games. They are not real chunky with big bits and a big board that captures your imagination the same way. I don't know if that's what is expressed, but that's what I feel about this. And I feel like a card game should have the same chances as a non-card game at winning an award. OGs can't be card games and card games can't be OGs is something that boggles my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I basically agree with what you just said there, but I think there is definitely a difference, which you also said. And the way I kind of think of it is that, well, I kind of think of OG as having two sort of traditional lineages that have led into it. One being the kind of traditional card games that you just play with a standard deck of cards, and there's a whole array of different games. And the other sort of main feeder into OGs, I think, is the kind of classic abstract, positional, spatial, played on a board with counters games. And I think a lot of the best OGs take parts from both of those things and they add to the spatial play of a board, but with the things that cards can bring and a bit of randomness can bring and a bit of hidden information can bring, and they combine those two things really nicely. But those are very distinct lineages. I totally agree with you that card games can be OG, that I have no problem with card games being in the Hall of Fame, being an OGGY, all the rest of it. But I'd also quite like to see a game with a big shared board win the award, because Scout won last year, which I think Scout's a great game, but I think if Scout won the first one and then Sea Salt and Paper won the second one, it's almost like, are people going to misunderstand then what actually OG is?
I think it's about that in the end, because I said it's about representation of the guild earlier, and I feel like Sea Salt and Paper has a good chance of winning, and would be if the objectives were just to pick the game you enjoy the most amongst all the nominees. That is OG enough, and I think it's a good representative. But also, we already have a small issue when the biggest seller in the hobby are Catan, Carcassonne, and Ticket to Ride, which are known outside our little niche as gateway games or casual games. And that's a hurdle when you're trying to define what OGs are to people who are in the hobby but don't have a good understanding of what this is and things. The gateway, the gateway game guild, or with these small little card games that are played very fast, it's the filler game guild. I don't know how people who are new to the hobby, are already in the hobby enough to have developed the vocabulary, would conceptualize based just on the kinds of game we like what our guild is. Like if you just gave them a list of games, and that's where the Hall of Fame, I think, currently does a good job at spreading the entire...
Yeah, it's weird, because in principle, if you think Sea Salt and Paper is the most OGGY-worthy game of this year, you should be able to vote for it. But there's already some context available, because last OGGY was also a card game, and that kind of does make a difference, because where we more or less found a common ground is that we don't consider like the OGGY to be best OG game of a specific year or something, but more also like a way to represent the playability, representation of a certain accessibility to the guild. And then especially for like newer players who are not that well aware about the whole board game space yet.
I'm starting to relate a bit better to all these big name awards in different fields where the jury gets accused of having done a political choice or something akin to that on a year where, you are actually trying to not always nominate or vote for the same things for reasons of representativity. And I realize that it's more complicated than pick what you like, because there's a public at the end.
And we talked at one stage in one of the threads about, maybe we could have the card game of the year and the board game of the year for the OGGY, like, and then it would have been last year, it would have been Scout and it would have been Brian Boru for the board game. But there's a whole bunch of things that are in the middle ground as well. I mean, Brian Boru obviously is driven by cards, even though it has a board as well, you know, so it just felt like...
I don't want to make that separation because there will always be some characteristic of a game that is likely to make it like 2 years in a row, right? And I don't want to create subcategories every time a pattern.
Yes. And the other thing, I'd like to make it not so much about the winner. We have 3 finalists, you know, and I think last year, you know, we could talk about all 3. And that's kind of the same when the Spiel des Jahres nominations come out. You know, people are interested in all the nominated games, not just what ends up winning, so...
I have been very long-winded on what, so I'll rotate to Martin. What game do you expect to win?
So I think there are probably 3 or 4 that I could see having a good chance, but the one I'm going to go for is Millefiori for a few reasons. It's one of the ones that slightly did come out in Germany around Essen 2021, but it certainly wasn't widely available in English till 2022. I think it only got its US release like at the start of 2023. So, and even then, although it hadn't been that widely available and it isn't available online, it was nominated for the OGGY last year and got quite close to making it to the final, even though not that many people had played it. So I think it's got to have a good chance this time, and it's a Knizia game. Obviously, he is kind of the name that most of us identify as, you know, he's certainly the most famous OG designer, and it's a game that I've played a lot. I've played it like over 20 times. Crucially for me, it's been the one of any Knizia game, really. I think it's been one of the biggest hits in my group recently because it seems to appeal to quite a lot of different types of players. Like, it does have OG aspects, but it also has some quite modern aspects, and it's got, you know, a lot of kind of comboing and point salady scoring to some extent as well, but it is very interactive as well, and you are looking at a shared board. You don't have a personal area. You're always thinking about how your pieces are going to relate to everyone else's pieces and trying to outthink people.
I realized I absolutely did not describe my pick whatsoever, so I'm going to jump in retroactively and just say, here's Sea Salt and Paper. What it does in life is it's Bruno Cathala loving very, very much the Hanafuda deck and wanting to take the main traditional game that is played with it and make it more palatable to Western audiences. So it looks very much like a traditional card game, but a bit not, and it's cute, and it has origami fishes. And it's a 2 to 4 player game, but you never want to play it at 4 players, and it's very cute. You can learn the rules in 3 minutes. Go play it on BGA, go buy it for $12. It's cute. So what is Millefiori actually?
So it is a game in which the main thing that you're doing is drafting cards to take actions. So that in itself is quite modern. You're going to get given 5 cards, choose one of them that you want to activate, pass the rest on. Once everyone's picked one, you're going to resolve them one by one. Then you're going to pick up the batch you just got picked, do the same thing again. So you're working your way around this draft. And the cards that you are drafting relate to being able to place pieces into certain different mini games, which all score in slightly different ways. But I think really crucially for me, those mini games don't take place just in front of you. You're not just putting pieces down, arranging them in your own little puzzle thing. The mini games are areas of a central board, and they all work where scoring depends to some extent on other players. And in some of those areas, that's more about blocking and trying to make connections and cut off other players' connections and stuff like that. But it also has some scoring where there's sort of mutual benefit, which is an interesting thing where, you know, you might put a piece down in such a way that it will score points for other players as well. But then in the future, it might score more points for you when they play on top of that, and so on. So quite interactive. And it also has this modern thing of these kind of crazy cascading chains of combos where each of these different mini games have ways that you can gain an extra turn, which you then draft a card. Instead of from the regular draft, there's a sort of side area where there are action cards from the same deck. But if you get an extra turn, you get to immediately take one of those cards and make a move in that mini game, which might then cascade you into another one. So sometimes, you know, there will be a turn in the game where you have maybe 4 or 5 of those ping off in a row, which is satisfying. The one way I've described it is sort of if you imagine something like Ganzschön Clever, but instead of it being a roll and write where you're all pinging off these mini combos on your own little bit of paper, they're all superimposed on top of each other, and it's all on one board, and they're all in relation to the other players.
I dig most of what you've been saying. The cascading thing makes me feel like I can't wait for this game to make it to the finals so I can play it and then not vote for it.
I would not be surprised if you didn't vote for it, for sure.
I think it's a game that I will find at least fine, and maybe I'll be happily surprised.
One thing I would say is I played the expansion once, and with the expansion, I would definitely not be nominating or recommending it for this award at all. It really makes it a lot more complex and longer, but also it adds back in this individual collection. There's this kind of set collection element where you're building your own little 3x3 grid of cards, which is going to score for columns and rows, and it turns it into the game that I was worried the base game was going to be from when I just read the rules, but actually the base game wasn't. So, I mean, I know some people have said really good things about the expansion and I've really enjoyed it, but for me, it turned it into a game that I wasn't interested in.
We need to have an episode about expansions at some point. Anyway, Baz, which game do you expect to win?
You guys obviously chose both things that I was going to choose.
Well, you're allowed. Yeah, you're allowed to. We do not have to have different picks. You're allowed to be honest.
Paper, but then I looked at Martin made like a nice statistic list, and I was really surprised about how many people already owned Minifiori. That because for me it was like, okay, this seems like an OG-ish game, like a modern OG. In that sense, very similar to Brian Boru. It has some OG qualities, but it obviously also seemed to have, I haven't played it yet, very much some modern Euro-ish qualities, like with the whole cascading combo thing, a bit of point sanity feeling, a bit of drafting around the table, which is also one thing I feel like is very common, at least in a lot of modern Euro-ish games. From what if I look at it, it would really hit the spot of what I would like to celebrate with the OGGY, and a modern take on an OG. And with that in mind, combined with the fact that it was already owned by so many people, I think it actually has quite good shot. OGs are also a bit about like playing with families, and I think it also really fits that spot really well. Seashot and Paper had the same considerations, but it's a card game. Heat I haven't played. I'm also not really longing to play Heat, because from the comments I heard, there are people who either really like it or also people who think it's not interactive enough, and I really expect to be in the last category, and therefore I'm not really looking to play that. So instead I will just use this time to discuss Caesar and Bacon, because I really like those games. Caesar, and with Caesar I mean then C is Rome in 20 minutes. Dome, which is like a small 2-player game by, what's his name again? Paolo
Mori?
Yeah, I don't think it will win because it is a 2-player game which obviously leans more on the 2-player combinatorial abstract side of the OG Foundation, and I know not everybody is into that specific thing, but it has also a bit of randomness. It's not like completely combinatorial. There's a nice tension. It's really nice and quick. So once again, that one could also go quite far. If I look at how many people already own it, if I look at the ratings,
I think it will be a good choice. Again, I think there's no reason that 2-player games can't be Hall of Fame. They can't be OGGYs.
Yeah.
You know, we've got several of examples.
Oh, that's the rant I was going to get into.
So, and I think it's a really nice, clean design with a shared board that's really interactive. I really like the way it has this thing of you want to control areas because that's how you win, but also closing an area gets you a bonus even if you don't win it. So there's this whole thing of, well, am I just going to close this area off even though I'm going to lose it, because actually the bonus is more important to me and I don't want to let the other player have both. I think it's a really cool little design, super quick.
Is that the game you want to win?
Are we segueing into the next section now, or
that was supposed to be a smooth segue until you acknowledged it.
So of the games that I think have a chance of winning, I think it's the one I most want to win. If I'm going to open it up to all the games I've played on the list, it wouldn't be my top choice of the one I'd absolutely love to win, I don't think. Although it's not far off. I would be very happy if it won. The game I was going to mention, which I don't think really has a shot of winning because it's not as widely known as the other ones we've been mentioning, but I think it's really cool and really embodies the sort of family-friendly, fun, colourful side of OGs, is The Wandering Towers, the Kramer and Kiesling game, which just immediately feels like a really very familiar thing. I think if you were introducing it to your family, they would understand exactly where it's coming from. You've each got a set of little wizard meeples which have to go around the board and get home. It sort of immediately evokes that whole Parcheesi, Ludo, whatever you want to call it. It's got that kind of...
Seg, that's absolutely something that was on my mind when you told about the ancestors of OGs, and you mentioned abstract games and traditional card games. But also, if you've ever had one of these 300 games in one little box
compendium
thing, you would have something like Parcheesi, which is very old, or the Goose Game, which is a French thing from the Renaissance, so it has been here for centuries. And that's the kind of games people, I think, mentally picture when you're talking about traditional board games.
Yeah, good point.
And maybe that plays in the idea that board games have a proper board and some little pieces of primary colors plus green.
Yeah, so I think it really kind of brings those feelings up straight away. And it also just has these really satisfying components where you've got these kind of big chunky towers which meeples can be on top of, and you, as well as moving your meeples around the board, you can also pick up a section of a tower which is carrying some meeples and move that around the board. So then you might be carrying your meeples around, but you also might be carrying other players around. But also these pieces are stackable, so you might take a section of tower and then stack it up on top of another section of tower which might cover up some meeples, and then they can't move. It even introduces, I'm sorry, Nicolas, you can close your ears if you want. It introduces this hidden trackable information of, well, where have my meeples gone? You only have 3 of them, so shouldn't be hard to remember where they are, but nevertheless, you find that you forget, and then you try to free them by moving a section of tower, and then you find it's something completely different under there, which is just funny, and I enjoy that. It's a really quick game. You're just playing cards for their movement value, trying to race these meeples around using the towers, and the home area itself also keeps moving around the board every time a meeple gets into it, so you've got a kind of moving target. You can pull off some satisfying little moves. So I just think it really fits the whole feel of OG really well. It's a fun game.
So is my understanding correct that the towers are like big 3D cardboard thingies that you hide in some of the floors?
Yeah, exactly. So they're like, you assemble them from cardboard when you first get the game. They may be like a couple of centimeters tall, and there's room for 6 meeples or something on top of them. And they can stack up to, you might end up with a stack of like 6 of these things on top of each other at some point during the game. So it's really nice to look at and just fun to play with.
If it makes it to the finals, I don't think anyone will be able to implement
Andy's
that.
already working
Andy's
on it.
Andy's already working on it.
2 steps
Jesus
ahead.
Christ! Okay.
You don't know it, but Andy is already working on the modules for the OGGYs for next year.
Yeah.
Bas, which game do you want to win the award?
You expect me to say Bacon, but I don't want Bacon to win.
No.
Because I really enjoy Bacon, but I don't think it's the best game to win the OGGY.
For the audience, what is Bacon?
It's a partnership shader, which can be played with 6, so 2 times of 3. And what is really interesting about Bacon is that in order to gain points, one of your teammates need to be the first one to be out, but then the other players also need to be out very quickly after that, because that's the way you gain most points. If your teammates are not able to empty their hand quickly enough, then you barely make any points, despite you being the first to go out. It's like a really tight balance of you want to be the first one out, but at the same time you also don't want to weak your teammates' hands too much, because that basically means that you don't make any points anyways. And then on top of that, a very typical part of a lot of shadows is that you can play like bombs. So, which are basically like a shadow's way of a trump. It goes over everything. In a tissue, those are quite hard to get, for example. It's a very typical shadow. But here you have 2 wild cards, which means that there will be a lot of bombs. Everybody will be bombing, and that's a very strategic part of the whole game. Like, you almost always have a hand that you can bomb, but do you actually want to bomb? Because it can completely ruin your hand, basically making you completely worthless for your team. So it's a really nice balance. But that's not the game I want to win. The game I want to win, because I think it's a very nice game, is Kazuka.
Oh, nice.
Ooh!
That was
Yeah.
another one I wanted to mention, so
Yeah,
I'm glad
because
that it's
I think Martin
coming up.
made the module for that, right? And we played it, I think,
yeah.
once with on Discord, and I was really surprised by it. Also, in the fact that I thought a bit about it after a few days, that's always a good sign. And I think it's a very good family-friendly OG, but it's also enough meat on the bone that's actually, quite interesting to play with your more gamer-oriented friends. It also really ticks well with my trick-taker brain in the sense that it has a little bit of deduction going on. What does the other player have? There's a little bit of asymmetry with the different powers that different players have. That's the part I see Martin cringe. That's the part apparently he is not that big of a fan. Okay.
No.
So yeah, I think that would be. I don't expect it to win simply because I don't think enough people have played it. But if I look, for example, at the average of the people who played this, it's really high. Yeah, that's the game I hope to win.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. I don't know if you said that it's a co-op, but it's the kind of co-op that I really like, which it isn't a solo game that you discuss with each other. It's the hidden information, limited communication co-op where you have your own information which you want to share with other people, but you only have this one way of communicating, which is, putting a counter down on the board, and you're trying to do a lot of different things with that signaling, which is in a way sort of reminiscent of bidding, as we talked about in Mew, this kind of signaling that you do with this bidding process. You mentioned the link to Trick Take. The other game it kind of reminds me of is Liar's Dice, but it's like a co-op version of Liar's Dice, where instead of saying I think there are 6 5s, you're trying to do that but collectively, and you're trying to get to the highest bid that you can, and preferably an exact bid. So you're trying to use these little bits of signaling you can do with the board and your special powers to collectively land on the right bid. So yeah, I think it's really cool. It's quite interesting. The theme is weird. I didn't really feel like I was an animal escaping from the zoo or anything, but
one of the things I
really
like about it, if you're talking about trick takers and co-op, one of the things that obviously comes up would be the crew, which is also a really nice co-op trick taker. I think most people have heard of that one. But I think if you look about it from an accessibility point of view, I think this is even a bit more accessible than the crew, because in order to be good at the crew, you at least need to grasp the basic principles of trick takers, and it helps if you're used to counting cards and things like that. And here it's a very straightforward way of communication and deduction, but the whole tension is, what do I actually want to communicate, and will I be able to get in the same line of communication with my co-op players? Because that's the difficult part. You only have just a small part of information, and the rest also just have a little small part of information, and you want to come together to a certain agreement, but it's really hard to find that common ground. That's the whole challenge. That's really nice.
Yeah, definitely.
I will just compliment both of the games you talked about. As I said, I'm not usually the biggest fan of shaders or the most skilled at them, and I absolutely like Bacon, where I didn't like the other designs of this designer as much, which is the design of Haggis, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not a teacher person either, and I was just like, this one instantly clicked. Everything is bombed. You have friends. The scoring is just, you want your team to get out, and then you want your team to get even more out, or to block the other team to getting even more out. It just works. And yeah, Kazuka, I'm probably not as enthralled as the both of you are by it. I found it fine, but I like it better than Perudo/Liar's Dice. Cooperative Perudo/Liar's Dice good, and I'm the same as Martin is on cooperative games, which is that I'm not very fond of what he tends to call solo by committee, where you have all the information available to all players, and then it's about being very nice with each other about how you're going to split the agency of what could be taken care of by a single player. So
there can't be any
design.
alpha gaming or something like that. You simply can't do that. You don't have that information.
Yeah, and some people will say that alpha gaming is a people problem, but I think there are also designs that encourage this a lot. And I'm always happy when we have cooperative games in the OG space, which are not that frequent. And as you mentioned, the crew is a trick taker, so it's not really in our ballpark, but it's still something that is very liked within the guild. And the hobby in general, it's in the top 100 of BGG, to my great surprise. I like that. My favorite contender for this year, you will probably think that I was going to talk about maybe Caesar's Empire, because I made an entire module for it. If I'm frank with myself, it's more about discoverability, because the publisher of this game has gone bankrupt and the thing is in licensing hell. I know that it's a redesign of a game from the same designer. There's a bit different in scoring that was only Polish market, if I remember correctly. If I'm honest with myself, a big part of why I like the game is because I discovered it myself by accident, and it's not a game that was fed by someone else. And I'm like, hey, I can talk about the guild, about this game that I played by myself that is current year. Actually, it's not current year. It released in the French market in 2021, but we have our rules about dates, so I guess. And I nominated it, but retrospectively, I'm not sure it's a great OG. It's a game where there's a bit train game-ish with shared incentive where you're building a network and all the roads lead to Rome. Whenever you build onto segments that are already existing, all the prevalent segments of the train line, let's call that the train line, score for everyone. But also you want to connect to cities despite you not owning the train lines, because the person who connects on the cities gets all the stuff that's on it. And all the stuff that's on it score via set collection gimmicks. And the scoring is the worst part of the game. The piggybacking is the best part of the game, and I wish the game just had a different scoring method, and then I would unequivocally calling it good. As it stands, it has a long setup time for the kind of experience it delivers, and also it's doomed as an Asterix franchise license game with a big box that's going to have to pay a license tax, and is a 20-minute game that comes in a giant box and sells for 40 euros or something, maybe a bit more even. The box and the price are sending the wrong expectation, and people are going to be disappointed that this game with a billion plastic minis is actually about the same length as a miniature ticket ride. And it is not the game I am voting for, because I nominated the second one, which is Caesar! Exclamation point, double point, seize Rome in 20 minutes! Exclamation point. This is the worst naming convention. I like this game. It's 2 players. One of the reasons why I wanted to win is to shut the hell up of everyone who thinks that 2-player games can't be OGs. Mini rant on the matter. I understand the thought process, because as a hobby, we have been trending towards more multiplayer solitaire games, and these games are more conducive to, one, work on this fundamental design level the same whether you're 1 player or 7. But because players do not interact, you can only spend so much time planning your next turn, which means you want your turn to come more often because there's not a lot interesting that's happening while it is not your turn. Which means that these games are getting progressively more and more conducive to reducing player count so that it's your turn more often. And so modern game design has gotten from games that are best at 3 to 5 players because of the interactive bits, to games that are good at 2 to 4, or even 2 to 3, or maybe even 2 to 4 but best at 2 just because your turn comes more often, and then going to solo games, and then at some point probably that people will start asking for 0-player mode or something.
Would you consider those games 2-player games? Because for me, 2-player games are games that can exclusively play 2-player and are also designed around that specific part and are often zero-sum, for example.
True, but I feel part of the sentiment against 2-player games is not necessarily 2-player games, but games that are conducive to 2 players. I have seen someone in BG say that the telltale that the game is OG is that the player count starts at 3, because at 2 they are not, I don't know if it's shared incentive or multiplayer politics or kingmaking, and I think that is a non-criteria. I think that it's true of a subset of games, depending on the kind of mechanics that you tend to favor. If you like shareholding, of course shareholding sucks at 2 players. If you like shared incentives and whatnot, it's better at 3 to 5. But that is not remotely the entire spectrum of OGs as far as I'm concerned. And I think that 2-player games are as valid as any to win the award. That's not a disqualifying criteria for me. What is, you've already talked a bit about it, what is Caesar exclamation point, semicolon or whatever it's called in English, Seize Rome in 20 minutes, terrible name. It's a 2-player abstract-ish game because you will place tokens on the board, but you draw them and have a random hand of them. And you're just trying to do area control as 2 players, but each token you place is at the border between 2 regions and has 2 different values on each half of the token that you place. So you have to choose which number gets where, and you're trying to control 2 regions each time you place a token down. And you're just trying to get all your control tokens on the board, and then you win. That was a terrible description, but I like it quite a bit.
I think one game you could compare it to in the classic OG sphere is Samurai, with the way you have these tiles that have exert influence on maybe more than one different area.
Absolutely.
And also that it has these kind of build up where you're trying not to complete things, and then all of a sudden it starts to cascade because things are getting so close to being complete, and you're like, well, now I have to play here to make sure that I take this one, and then that's maybe going to cause something else to, like the old sort of pen and paper dots and boxes game
that whole
as
game
well.
of
It has
chicken,
these little...
which is also like common in an OG two-player games. I was wondering, Nicolas, after your whole rant about two-player games being OG.
I'm not saying that two players are OG
Yeah.
by nature, it's just that the two are not separate.
For me, what I
categories
realized when we were talking about Caesar, and I think for me the distinction where a two-player abstract becomes more or less OG or more OG is there's just a little bit of randomness added.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we absolutely. There are two guilds that we generally do not infringe on, even though abstracts do not have a guild, but they have a fandom and they have had their own forums for a while. So the positional combinatorial abstracts, we leave them in peace, even though they are proto-OG in some form, and trick-taking card games too, we leave them alone. But if games have properties that make them not suitable to being considered by combinatorial fans, combinatorial games being games that from a setup could be solved because they contain no random or hidden elements.
I envy them, their ability to have a strict mathematical definition of their games, unlike us.
We have to actually go by a social definition of it, which is and whenever a game strays away from one of these two genres, I feel like we're the foster home for it. So, for example, Taluva I would deem OG because you have a random draw, even barely consequent. It's like, which type of color of tile do I have to place?
Something like War Chest, for example, I found leans very close towards OG because
Yeah.
on paper it looks very combinatorial abstract because you have positioning, because of the whole back building aspect. You have that like this kind of push your luck element of okay, I will do this move and I might be lucky because my component can't actually do a counter move simply because he didn't draw the tile he needed.
Yeah. Okay, so now for the contentious part. Is there any game that you would like to see lose? Starting with Bars, I think.
Well, I don't think I've played enough of them to actually make one want to lose. For example, I think Dwarf Romantic has been nominated. It has been spilled as I don't think that would be a really great overlap from my perspective for the OGGY. But if people really like it, it's fine. I don't want it to lose, but I just don't care enough about it, I think.
Yeah, I feel like it's a good representative of the small schism that there is in the guild in what is the main property of OGs. Is it the simplicity and accessibility of the rules, or is it some sort of return to some not too confrontational player interaction? And Dwarf Romantic really is focusing on the former rather than the latter, which is make a game that is accessible and familial and cozy, but is essentially very solitaire. My understanding of it is...
Yeah, I haven't played it, but I have played the video game a lot. If we, for example, make the comparison to Kazuka, which is a game I would really like to win, which is also a co-op. Like what Martin said, that with Kazuka, it's like you have to interact with the other people in order to win. And with Dwarf Romantic, my understanding is that you have like to discuss, okay, what would be the best spot to place that tile, and you will score points based on that, because I know the basic principle of that's just something I'm not really interested about, because it's just discussing a puzzle.
It doesn't even have the pandemic thing of having your own hand, so you have some things that only you can do. It's really irrelevant whose turn it is. You know, either way, someone's going to turn a tile over, and then you're all going to talk about where to put it. But there's nothing hidden at all.
My understanding is we're even a step beyond it not being pandemic, because in pandemic you have your own pawn, right?
Yeah.
In Dwarf Romantic, it's just everyone's turn every turn, just someone has the final say. Not what I would like to win, but my pick for what I would like to lose is not really Dwarf Romantic, because I don't think it has any realistic shot at the award. What I would like probably to see lose is Heat. There was this game that was called Flamme Rouge. Not my favorite game. I respect what it does, and it's relatively popular with my family. And what it does is having a racing game where you have little cards and you're trying to manage two things that are both super interactive. You have two races and you have to manage not being blocked by spending cards that allow you to move a lot, but actually you can't do half the movement because you're blocked by the runners in front. And being one gap behind other cyclists, so you can just slipstream and gain a free movement point. Heat removes all the blocking and just is like giving you a complicated engine that is relatively interesting, but then the only interactive decision becomes, is my opponent going to be at this spot that I predict, given vaguely on what they've played previously, and I just end up next to them or behind them and I slipstream. And the remainder of the complexity is put in the entire Heat engine, which I have heated opinion about it. I think this game is a bit of a car crash. And the reason why I think it's a car crash is that a lot of people defend that it's a different feeling of race and a better thematic integration because of all the motor management and whatnot. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? What thematic integration? You have a car racing game with no collisions.
I mean, they're not
Famously a problem when you're driving a car. No collisions. And what happens, not only do you not collide with other players, but you do not collide when you get out of the track. What happens is the little bloody cloud Lakitu from Mario Kart just fishes you, puts you gently at the beginning of the last slope, and your car is entirely intact and restarting on first gear, and that's about it. And I'm like, what is the thematic enhancement here? Are you bloody kidding me? This should be a bloodbath compared to a cycling race or a running race or whatnot.
They're not supposed
That's
to
it.
crash, Nicholas. It's
They are
it's
not,
not a
but
demolition
danger
derby.
should be there.
So I actually was going to pick Heat as well for the game I wouldn't like to see win, but for slightly different reasons. I like it. I think it's a good game. I actually find it more fun than Flamme Rouge, which I also enjoyed, but I think the thematic integration works quite well in some senses. I like the sort of managing this heat. It really forces you to take risks. If you don't take risks, you'll just get left behind, and then you won't be able to catch up and benefit from the slipstream. And it has the way it models the corners, I think works really well. You do have to think about the way the other players are going to approach those corners and what that means about how you approach them. So I've played it a few times, including on BGA now, where you have a bit more time to actually consider that as well if you're playing an async game. So I do think it's a good design, and I was quite impressed that it took some things from the system of Flamme Rouge, but Flamme Rouge, the thematic integration works quite well as well, I think, and you get things emerging that actually do happen in real cycle races, like these breakaways and the tactics, but they tweak that to make something that feels more like the motor racing theme. So I do enjoy it, but I don't think it's interactive enough for me, and you can get left behind or you can get far ahead, and in that case you're just managing your deck as best you can. You don't even have the chance to slipstream off anyone. But also I would like us to not pick the highest rated game on BGG that could be vaguely considered OG, which undoubtedly that's what Heat is this year. I looked at the overall rankings on BGG, and the highest ranked game from 2022 is Frosthaven, which no one's going to argue is OG. And the second highest ranked game is Heat, which you can say, yes, it has reasonably simple rules. Yes, it has a shared board. So you could consider it.
It has Days of Wonder production
Right.
values. That plays a lot in it.
So, yeah, I just think we wouldn't be picking something that was distinctively representative of the interests of our guild. We'd be picking something that's well known and well liked and kind of in the OG general area. So that's why I would hope that we picked something different.
Yeah, I think we're agreeing on that. The main difference is that you enjoyed the game and I was utterly bored by it, I guess. So there's also a personal investment for me with, I don't think this game is OG, and also I really don't like it.
Yeah, I think it's also really dependent on what you feel and think the OGGY represents. Because I think we are more or less on a very common definition of what the OGGY should represent. A way to celebrate modern games with OG sensibilities, which is something different than the game we think is really good and very close to.
Yeah, and the other one I just mentioned quickly because it's owned and liked quite a lot, but I definitely wouldn't like it to be a finalist even, is Acropolis, because it's just a fully take and make, as we call them. It's, yes, maybe there's definitely more interaction if you play with two players, but the interaction is completely restricted to taking a tile that someone else wants, because otherwise they're going to get it.
Something like San Francisco. Because from what I've seen, that also seems very take and makey. But from what I've heard, especially from you, it isn't that
so
take and
the
makey.
difference with San Francisco, which is kind of Knizia's take on the take and make genre, the difference there is that in something like Acropolis and in a classic take and make, the only interaction is in taking, and then you're going to make something and you're going to be scored entirely for the thing you've made. The difference in San Francisco is that all of the scoring is relative to the other players. So you're going to be scoring for being the first to finish a row. You're going to be scoring for having the most workers in a particular row. So you have to think about what the other players are doing more, I think. You're not just building your thing. And actually, you're not really taking many decisions on your own board. It's not like you're kind of fiddly rearranging things to try and figure the best optimization for your stuff. The cards you take, you just have to pretty much put them down left or right in the different coloured rows. So it feels more interactive. But I still wouldn't pick it to win the OGGY because it does feel more of that kind of take and make model than a truly kind of shared space model. So
yeah, I think that's interesting because in both cases you are basically doing some kind of min-maxing. But if you're min-maxing against other players, it feels OG.
Right.
While if you're basically min-maxing against the game, it's not OG. You're just min-maxing against
right,
randomness.
exactly.
I have a question for you, Martin, because you are basically the inventor of the OGGY. Is there like a certain bandwidth of people you would like to reach with it? Or like, for example, what John kind of did when he said, okay, everybody, please make your OGGy list. And then I think for like 1 week, OG took over the front page of BGG, and then the solo guild came in and swooped everything away. But for 1 week, we had a top spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could probably do more to publicize it. I think last year, once we knew the winner, I made a geek list with the winner and the finalists and all of the games that were nominated and linked from there to the guild and, you know, all the other places, the Hall of Fame and so on. And hopefully that, you know, drew a few people in. I know, you know, it's going to trigger people's subscriptions to particular games and they're hopefully going to check some of it out. I always feel like there's a slight tension in terms of how much publicity we do, in that I think, you know, we've got well over 1,000 now, 1,300 people in the guild or something, and it still feels like a space where you kind of know who's there and you know that people are broadly there for the same reasons, and the people who are voting in these polls probably never really gets past 200 for the Hall of Fame and the OGGYs and things like that, like maybe 1 to 200. And it would be sad if we got so many people voting in those things that they weren't actually all really sure about what they were. You know, I want the people who vote and make these decisions for things like the Hall of Fame and the OGGY to be people who care about this stuff and are interested enough to have spent some time in the guild and not just be kind of drive-by, oh, this is my favourite game, so I'm just going to vote for my favourite game. So
yeah, we want to be as open as possible to new members. And it's not about if there is a large influx of people, the guild is going to lose its identity. But actually, to some extent, yes. Hypothetically, let's say that the entire population of BGG by tomorrow has subscribed to the guild. Then the guild is undistinguishable from BGG's general forums.
Yeah, and that's also because there is no definition of OG.
Yeah.
That's already where the problem starts. Like, okay, but then what do you consider OG? We already had all those semantic discussions at the start of the guild, and then we kind of reached a common ground. But with the growth of the guild, obviously, that's
exactly. And you know, you kind of, what I'm thinking of is things like when they do the Golden Geek Awards, they have all these different categories, well, different weight categories and different, you know, party games and all of this, and quite often you'll get a game winning in a whole ton of different categories that you don't really think it actually fits into, just because it's everyone's favorite game, so they just vote for it wherever they can. So yeah,
you don't want to see BoardGameGeek's OG of the year just being, I'm trying to find the name of a game that would not fit, but I'm not sure.
Just being a popularity vote, because that's not very interesting, because we already have a way to do the popularity vote, which is called the Geek Rating.
So I mean, I think it's good for the guild to grow and to publicize it, and the OGGY is probably a good way of doing that, but also with that slight caveat that, you know, let's keep it as something that we want it to keep its identity as well.
Time for some announcements. The first one is that we are going to indefinitely postpone or even literally sunset the news, which Martin has told me we are not very good at, which is the most British way I've heard to criticize my editing time and untimeliness of everything, which frees a bit more time for other things to come back to the podcast. So if you have any inquiry and are not part of the guild and do not necessarily to want to join this bunch of weirdos, we now have an email address for the podcast, which is
cuberoots@mailo.com.
So if you want to ask some audience questions or give us feedback or tell us why the hell did you make a segment about Watcha playing lately where you talk about a billion different games, where your main topic is talking about another billion different games. I have already forgotten about half of them. why are you so bad at things, you can send, again, an email to
cuberoots@mailo.com.
Counter argument: if you're sending emails to a board game podcast complaining you're talking too much about board games, you might actually have some wrong priorities in life. But
Hi, super distant future Nicolas here. We had recorded a segment about which game we were excited to play in the near future, but I have made the executive decision to delete that segment for the following reasons. 1. Fuck the consumerist hype cycle. 2. That's it, and that should be enough by itself, frankly. Thanks for your understanding. Super distant future Nicolas, out!
Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-bum.
Thank you for joining us today. This is the part where we shield for our socials or what we've been doing lately and is of notable interest or not notable general public interest. Today with me has been Bas.
yeah, I'm maybe young, but I don't have that many socials. If you want to contact me, just go join the OGGY Discord and we can play some games together. I would prefer that.
Also with me today has been Martin. Martin, what are you doing of public interest?
Oh, just the usual of popping up all around corners of BGG. You can find my blog, QWERTY, and I occasionally get round to posting more than once a month, but you'll certainly find a monthly update on the new games I've played, along with some stuff about music and books that you probably are not interested in.
Why would we
wouldn't
not
we?
be
Why
interested?
Yeah,
Like
I always-
you
I always
post it.
read-
You post it on a board gaming website, and people are reading that. Why would you assume that people listening to this podcast find it boring?
Okay, but at the same time, Nicolas, you assume people would send complaints to a board game podcast they talk too much about board games, so...
Have you seen the feedback Daryl gets on his videos? And I've been Nicolas Weiss. I'm usually the guy turning everything off topic. When I'm not busy doing that, these days I'm doing board game modules for playing online. You can find them as well as other mostly gaming-centric content at paladinofcats.free.fr. And now here's the part where... Oh, kitty! Look, my kitty is in the camera. That's the part where we try to find something to say that is not talking about my cat while the outro fades in.
The cat is not interested at all. It's like, put me down, Nicolas. Put me down.